as we've heard China strongly condemning the U.S. attack. And we've even heard from Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, calling on China for its role to ask Iran not to close down the Strait of Hormuz. What role, if any, does China have in this?
Great to be with you, and a great question to start with. I think that China is not going to try and mediate between the United States and Iran, but as you know, Beijing has a good relationship with Tehran, and I think they're going to be focused on using that relationship to press on 2 points. The first is the Strait of Hormuz. A large share of China's energy comes through that strait, which is the same for South Korea and Japan and India. So I think the Chinese government is going to be strongly urging Iran not to close that really important shipping route. The other thing they're going to be doing is to try and discourage Iran from responding with a military attack on the United States in retaliation, because I think China will be worried about the impact this would have on regional stability and also on the global economy. So in that sense, they're probably pretty much aligned with what Marco Rubio would like them to do.
I'm just reading here something from a Signum Global Advisors, and they're giving reasons that Iran wouldn't attack Hormuz, saying that China may not be that irate at paying more for oil from other sources if it means the U.S. suffers even more. Is there any truth to that?
I don't think that's likely. We have to recognize that close to half of China's energy imports come through the Strait of Hormuz. So the pain for China, as well as for India, South Korea, and Japan, would be significant. So I doubt they're going to take a position like that. I think the Chinese government, typically in cases like this, is really focused on stability and damping down the risk of this turning into a much broader regional conflict, which would then have potentially a big impact on the global economy.
So as far as diplomacy is concerned, do you think that China would step in this way?
I think they are probably holding quiet, private conversations with the government in Iran on both of those points, on not blocking or closing the Strait of Hormuz and not responding militarily in retaliation for the U.S. attack in a way that would spark a much broader, more dangerous regional conflict because of the economic implications of that.
I want to take note that the U.S. had moved aircraft carrier USS Nimitz in recent days, rerouting from the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East. At the time that was happening, of course, questions being raised, well, what's going to be happening to the stability in the region with the U.S. move of its, of course, military its aircraft carrier. Is there any concerns with regards to military conflict over Taiwan with regards to China?
I don't think Taiwan is a factor in this at all. My view is that Xi Jinping has no plans for using force against Taiwan. And so I don't believe he's sitting in the Zhongnanhai leadership compound looking for an opportunity when the U.S. is distracted by other things. I would rate that as an extraordinarily low probability.
As we continue to watch the developments, of course, we are tracking the geopolitics and the dynamics between the U.S. and China and how things are going in terms of the trade front. Of course, a little bit distracted, the rest of the world, with what's going on over in the Middle East. But how are things going along with the United States and China as far as the trade tariffs are concerned?
Well, it doesn't look like there's been a lot of progress. We haven't really heard much from either side since the meeting in London a couple of weeks ago. And I imagine that the Trump administration for the foreseeable future is going to be quite distracted by what's happening in the Middle East. I also imagine that plus the legal challenges to President Trump's authority for issuing tariffs is going to lead a lot of countries to pause their negotiations and say, why do we want to make any deal where we have to make concessions to the United States when we don't know what the world is going to look like 2 months or 4 months from now? So my guess is that things are going to slow down to an even slower pace than they've been on the tariff negotiations since Liberation Day. And the president is going to have to give more extensions on the tariff.
So we are seeing a lot of extensions when it comes to President Trump and the deals that he's doing. TikTok is one of them. You're saying that the U.S. attack on Iran could further complicate the tariff talks specifically with China. Tell us more.
I think they're going to complicate the tariff talks with everybody because the Trump administration is going to have to be directing all of its energy at dealing with what they have unleashed with the bombings in Iran, and that's going to take a lot of effort. They're going to be talking to all of their allies, the same countries that they want to speak to about tariffs and are putting them under a lot of pressure. They're going to be asking for help on dealing with the Iran problem. So it's not a great time for the Trump administration to be threatening other governments, especially in Europe and Asia, on tariffs when they're also going to be at the same time asking for help in some way in managing what's going on in the Middle East right now. So I think things are going to slow down even more on the tariffs, and we're going to see more pauses in the escalation in tariffs. Let's also remember that there's still this unresolved tension, I think, in the Trump administration between his hawks, who have been saying that China is the pacing threat, the number one threat, according to the intelligence community and the military, not Iran. And yet you have the president saying very constructive, positive things about China, about Xi Jinping. So I think there is this tension of what does the president really want versus what do his hawks really want? And that hasn't come to a resolution yet.
So China's exports to the United States are a lot less than before, and you're explaining that the tariff chaos is likely to be more painful for the U.S. than it is for China. So that could lead to a Trump retreat. What would that look like?
Yeah, think about it this way. China last year only sent about 15% of its total exports to the United States. That was equal to less than 3% of China's GDP. China's biggest export markets are ASEAN and the EU now. Just in the last 2 months, Chinese exports to the United States have fallen by almost 30%. But China's total global exports are up 8% year over year. So I think the Chinese feel that they can manage this better because at some point soon, we're going to start to see inflation pressure. We're going to start to see pressure on profits for corporates, factories that use inputs, because a lot of people don't realize that more than half of what we import in the United States from China is intermediate goods that are used in our factories to produce other things. We've started hearing talk about layoffs from some of the car companies, and we're going to see prices rising. So I think China probably feels that time is on their side right now.